In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the rear caliper on this GMC Yukon. Let's get started. Let's remove the wheel. 6 22mm lug nuts hold this wheel on. Remove them all. Pull the wheel off. Now with the wheel off from the back side of the caliper, let's break free this 11mm bolt. The reason I'm doing this now is so that once it's broken free, it'll be easier to remove when the caliper is off the vehicle. Once you broke it free, snug it back up so that fluid doesn't drip, but at least it is somewhat broken free. Again, easier to remove later. Use a 13mm socket to remove both of these mounting bolts that hold the caliper onto the bracket. Pull these off, pry the caliper inward a little bit. This will compress that piston just enough to give you some slack to pull it off. And then once I do pull it off, I'm going to put it right on this trailing arm over here so that it doesn't pull on that brake hose. I don't want to damage the brake hose. Next, I'm going to take the pads off. Now I'm going to take these two 18mm bolts off that hold the caliper bracket onto the axle. Break them free with either a breaker bar or a long ratchet. They are pretty tight on here. Once you do get them to break free, they should come out somewhat easily. Okay, pull the bracket off. Before we install this on the vehicle, put some brake grease or silicone paste on these areas where the anti-rattle clips are going to ride, just a thin layer. I'm using silicone paste. It is rated for high temperature for brakes, so I'm good. But whatever you're using, make sure it's not going to melt when you get these brakes nice and hot. And of course, we're going to do the same to both sides. With that grease on there, put the anti-rattle clips on, line them up, and make sure they lock into place. And do the same to this other side here. Put both on, make sure they're flush and bottomed out. Now slide the caliper over and line up the two bolts. And the other one right on the bottom here. Now I do want to add some grease to these pins here, but I'm going to wait until these bolts are fully bottomed out and torqued. That way I know that that part is done. If you have the light duty suspension package, these get torqued to 148 foot-pounds. If you have the heavy duty suspension, these get torqued to 221 foot-pounds. I have the light duty, so 148 is the torque for me. Now onto these slider pins. I like to take them out even though it's a brand new caliper and inspect the amount of grease that's on here. Usually, personally, I like to add more than what there already is. So I'm going to put this remaining grease inside. I'm going to add some extra grease inside the boot. I'm using that same silicone paste I used earlier, and this is going to act as a reserve of grease pretty much, because I can put some on the pin here, but I can't put too much because it'll get wiped off as I slide the pin in. The boot sits flush with the pin, so it's not going to allow too much to go in. At this point, I'm going to slide the pin in. The excess grease will pop out of the boot. And now you'll see that there's air stuck behind the pin here, or inside the bore. So what I'm going to do is press this in and squeeze the boot. If that doesn't work, you're going to have to very, very gently put a little pocket screwdriver in here and lift up this boot. There you go. You can hear the air squeezing out past the grease. Give this a couple spins back and forth, and you should be good to go. I'm going to pull the top one out, peel that boot back. I'm going to inspect the amount of grease in here. I'm going to put some right inside the boot, and I'm going to put the rest on my slider pin. Get this in there. Now take your pads and slide them on. The inner pad had the wear indicator on the top, so keep that in mind. You want to put them back the way they came. The outer pad did not get a wear indicator at all. Make sure these slide nice and smooth. Now take the new caliper, slide it over, and let's get the two mounting bolts. Start these in. The torque for these two is going to be 38 foot-pounds. These new bolts are 17mm in size, by the way. And two. Now you're going to want a collection bucket ready so that we can remove the banjo bolt off the old caliper, pull the hose off, and put it on the new caliper. So take your 11mm and remove this banjo bolt. It's going to be easier if you have a power tool of some sort. Now you'll notice that the banjo bolt will be stuck on the hose because of this inner washer. In order to get that off, you'll need a pair of pliers. Pinch that washer in the pliers and unthread the bolt. There you go. Discard that. Get rid of the old bolt as well as the washer on the other side. With a clean rag, wipe off the end of the hose to make sure there's no sand and other debris in the way here. Now you're going to want to take your new bolt, put one brand new copper washer on. These should be provided with your caliper. Then stick that through the hose. Make sure it's going the right direction. If you put it backwards, the hose will be twisted. Then put a washer on the other side, so sandwich the hose in between, and then just line it up with the caliper. Make sure the hose is pointing straight up or coming from the top, not sideways. If it's going from any other direction, it's not installed correctly. Now bottom this out once it's started by hand. There we go. Now let's torque it. The torque for this is 30 foot-pounds. If for some reason you can't torque it, just make it nice and snug. Go about 1/3 of a turn after it's bottomed out. Your goal is basically to squeeze those copper washers. That's what's going to create the seal. That's 30 foot-pounds right there. So now I'm going to take my brake parts cleaner, clean everything up because I definitely want to make sure I notice if there is a leak here. So get all the old brake fluid off. And now let's bleed the air out of the new caliper. The bleeder screw on this caliper is actually in a pretty sneaky spot. It's right behind it over here. So I'm going to try to pop this bleeder screw cap off. There we go. Now grab a 10mm wrench. Break the bleeder screw open, and we'll do a gravity bleed. What this means is we're going to let gravity pull the fluid through the brake hose, fill the caliper, and push the air out. Once we're done with the gravity bleed, you're going to want to do a full manual brake bleed so that you can ensure that all the air is out of the system. To begin your manual brake bleed, make sure that your brake master cylinder is topped off with clean fluid. Then you're going to want to have a second person in the car pumping up the brake pedal as you open and close the bleeder screw. So after a few pumps, have them hold pressure on the brake pedal and open up the bleeder screw. At this point, air and fluid will come out. Once the pedal has reached the floor, close off the bleeder screw and have them pump up the brakes again. After 2 to 3 pumps, have them hold pressure on the brake pedal once again and open up the bleeder screw. Repeat this procedure until no more air comes out of the caliper and you have only clean fluid. Once you get to that point, close off the bleeder screw and top off the master cylinder with clean fluid to make sure it's full. Let's get the wheel on. Put on all 6 of your lug nuts and in a cross pattern, torque them to 140 foot-pounds. Double check them. And take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.